maybe because you just said you were doing some research for the next project. How is that happening, or how do you prepare for another project, or how do you prepare the next project or something?
Yeah, I guess it was a little bit more abstract. Um, Basically, I was officially studying just intonation,
Hmm.
um, and this is something I've been kind of, I don't know, in a pretty non-committal way looking at for a couple of years, but I wanted to like have a chance to actually like get more into the history of it and the scholarship on it. Not to like become an expert or an academic or like a, composer who only uses just intonation, but just to sort of have that as a thing that I know about that I can use within my, box of tools, however it feels like the right, um, whatever feels like the right context for it. So kind of focusing on like various notation practices and um, like practical issues. Like I don't know if you've ever delved into that, but like a lot of it
Mm.
is it's like not quarter tones, it's in between
Yeah.
quarter tones and um, like equal temperament, and figuring out how much of that I can hear,
Mm.
teaching myself to hear a lot of things, not usually with fingerings, usually just with like adjusting pitch, just like
Hmm.
really wanting to have my ears be strong on that. Because I, obviously, or maybe it goes without saying, but if I'm bringing in a band a piece that is written using like stuff that's hard to hear, I want to make sure that I can hear
Yeah,
it.
sure.
um, yeah, so training myself and just like listening to a lot of music and seeing what's gotten before in that front and what I like and maybe what I don't like, and kind of through that figuring out which route I want to take in
Yeah.
that field. Yeah, so I was just listening to a lot of music, reading a lot of books, um, and kind of like starting to brainstorm ideas for what the next thing I write for will be.
Hmm. So
Yeah,
if you're planning to imply that in your music, if you want to do that on the flute or on the saxophone,
both.
or both,
Yep,
both. Hmm.
yep.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess if you get a feeling for it and if you hear it, then you can probably do it on both instruments. It doesn't matter so
yeah,
much.
flute's a little bit more flexible pitch wise because I play an open hole flute,
Hmm.
which means I can get a lot of gradations in between pitches just by
Hmm.
like sliding my fingers on and off a key. Whereas saxophone, obviously, it's you can do that with your embouchure and you can kind of like raise, half lower fingerings if you want to adjust things, but a lot of it is much more embouchure based. I'm not really interested in like finding fingerings for every single gradation. I more
Hmm.
want to just like use my ear and sort of like intuition to figure out where those pitches are. But yeah, for both, and then for other instruments too. Like a lot of that music that uses just intonation that I was checking out, and a lot of sort of the writing that's happened with it in the past uses instruments that can be tuned differently.
Okay.
So a lot of strings with like scordatura for strings. So when you think of that in a jazz context, what does that mean? Um, Brass instruments, you have a bit of an advantage because your instruments are already kind of just like overtone series based.
Hmm.
So yeah, basically just just exploring all the options,
Okay. Yeah,
seeing
sounds
what's out there.
interesting.
Yeah. So clockwise is based on, well, first of all, let me backtrack and just say that all of the music that is on this record, clockwise, is based on 20th century percussion works that I was
Hmm.
looking at, and that was kind of based coming from the fact that I had that band. I don't know if you're familiar with it uh, or any of your students would be familiar with it, called Percussive Mechanics,
Hmm.
which was my like German band actually from when I was a grad student at the Jib. Um, and anyway, so that band had two drummers, and I was about to do a third record for Pirouette, and um, was like feeling a little bit at the end of my rope in terms of like how much I felt like I knew about writing for percussion music or writing for percussion. Like I writing for two drummers just kept feeling harder and harder.
Hmm.
Like I didn't know what to do because I felt like I needed to make it worthwhile, but I also didn't. I had no more ideas.
Hmm.
So in order to write this third album, I decided to study 20th century percussion music and really get like a handle on people who'd really checked out um, writing for percussion. Like, how can you write for a bunch of percussionists at the same time? Like, how can you organize music if you're thinking more about like rhythms rather than harmony and melody? So that was sort of the impetus originally, and then Pirouette stopped being able to make records. So, and then I'd already been living in New York for a really long time after that, and it was just becoming less and less practical for me to have this band that was totally in Germany. So I ended up deciding to take that idea of studying 20th century percussion music and apply it to a new band that was based in New York. So that's sort of how this idea came about. Anyway, this piece, Clockwise, is based on a Stockhausen piece called Zyklus,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really cool piece. I highly recommend checking out the score. If I'm sure it's possible to find that in whatever school music library.
Sure.
Um, but it is the score that like can be read forwards or backwards and upside down or right side up, and you can start at any point in the piece and then read it the whole way through and then end at that point.
Uh-huh.
So
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about all these things when I was writing this piece. Like I wanted to have this thing that kind of felt like a cycle. Um, I also theoretically, when I was writing this, felt like I could start and end this piece at any point and then finish off like right before it started. I've never actually performed the piece like that. It always sort of has a pretty like it starts at the beginning and goes to the end.
Mm-hmm.
But if you'll see, the title of this is B to A or Clockwise B to A, and that was just that just sort of didn't make the final cut when I put it on the album. I just called it Clockwise. But the idea was that this is actually starting like at the second, letter B and then going the whole way through and then coming back and ending at A.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whether I actually did that or not is sort of up to the listener, but that
Mm-hmm.
was the original idea. The other thing that the Stockhausen piece deals with is different levels of density and determinacy, and yeah, I guess those he deals with a lot of different elements. He has like I think 9 different things that are sort of going through cycles over the course of the piece. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would have to go and read over all of the notes I took when I was doing
But he
research.
mentions them in the scores, or what? The nine different things, or
I can't remember if he mentions in the score or if it was just that I was reading a bunch of articles
yeah.
written about
Okay.
this piece.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like, it's a very clear like levels of determinacy, levels of density, levels of like just different kinds of sounds. Like he's a very organized thinker. If you've ever like checked out any of his um, writing about
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and sometimes it's organized to the point of like not actually being obvious when you're listening to the music. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. But he definitely has thought a lot about all the different like levels of things.
Yeah.
So this is sort of my own little way of interpreting some of the things that were going on in the Stockhausen piece. And basically, um, for me, I was thinking about density and determinacy and orchestration as the prime things. And so, in terms of density, the piece like starts off with just a solo instrument and then slowly adds instruments until it's like everybody's in and then slowly takes instruments away. And then orchestration, it kind of like adds instruments and then takes the instruments that are first out were the first in. So it kind of has like
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to make it so that everybody kind of had a little thing where they were more featured. And then, but the thing that really was driving me when I was writing this piece was what are the different levels of Stockhausen. I mean, I guess he would use the German word for this, which I don't know what it is, but um, maybe you do. He for he was really thinking about determinacy, and I was also like, how does that factor into what I do? And in a type of music where improvisation is very important, I guess I was just thinking about like, well, what are the different ways that improvisation can happen within a piece?
Mm-hmm.
Because there can obviously be no improvisation and there can be a solo, but I was feeling that there was a lot of different things that could happen in between those.
Mm-hmm.
So what I ended up coming up with was I could have fully written, um, I could have a solo with limited improvised accompaniment, I could have a fully notated accompaniment with a solo, I could have just a improvised thing that's like actually there's no main solo, but it's sort of improvised accompaniment to something that's written. And it was just I kind of wrote down all these ideas, and then I figured out kind of a way that felt like a cycle to me. And so
Mm-hmm.
the form of this piece, I'll just start here. It starts off with solo instrument, so bass with
Mm-hmm.
no improvised accompaniment, and then the bass flute plays this line that's as written. And then here it's a solo flute with bass, and then these other instruments slowly come in. And I'll zoom in a little bit on the score so you can
Yeah.
read it. But basically, you can see that in this order, it says improvised backgrounds, enter slowly in this order, vibes, cello, trombone. So first you have um, the vibraphone comes in, and these are the instructions for the people doing the background thing. So either play either or both pitches per chord. So I use sort of a dotted bar line just to show that like this is per chord. The harmonic rhythm is half notes played by the bass, so that tells people what to listen for. And then within each half note, they have two notes that they can choose from. So play either or both pitches, and then tremolo, bisbigliando, so like a alternate fingering thing,
Mm-hmm.
flutter tongue, or like pulsations on either or both of these pitches, and do not play all the time or on every chord.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I wanted this to be like an improvised accompaniment that where people still felt like they were contributing in an improvised way to the music, but also with like it was going to sound a certain way, like it wasn't totally free. Um, and in some ways, I kind of think about that as similar to like in a traditional jazz context where you would have like somebody comping, um,
Sure.
right? Like somebody who's like playing piano comping along with the traditional jazz solo is not, they are improvising. They're not totally free to do whatever they want. They're playing over a specified
Mm-hmm.
harmonic grid, harmonic structure. Like the time is specified. They know kind of what they can do. They're reacting to certain things over like a predetermined set of pitch materials and time materials. So in a more abstract context like my music where we're not dealing with like um, traditional jazz changes, I wanted to figure out how to get that same kind of effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's basically what this is. It's like an improvised background section.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is improvised solo with improvised accompaniment. And then the next section in this piece is a piano solo with a fully notated accompaniment.
Yeah.
And so that's there. And then the next section is fully notated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next section, and then so it basically goes to that point, fully notated, and then it goes back. And that's kind of the cycle aspect of this piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is this is the fully notated, and then the next section we have is the mirror of the piano solo. So now it's a fully notated accompaniment with a drum improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of the bass flute solo, you have this section where it's actually just an improvised accompaniment with sort of a cantus firmus in the cello part. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a similar idea to what happened before.
Yes.
Start immediately, start dance, become sparse, play pitches as quick swells or staccato attacks, each note played in specified octave, harmonic rhythm is half note played by the cello. So in each half note, everybody has three different notes that they could play, and they can kind of just, you know, do
Mm-hmm.
whatever within that framework. But it's going to sound one way because actually there's a lot of rules that they have to follow within that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the different levels of improvisation within this piece.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the next thing was density. I wrote the pitch contents in this piece. I was just like, I had this idea for like density, levels of density and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like a lot of times I'll be writing, just have all these cool like formal ideas, but then it comes down to writing the notes, and I don't really know what to do. So something that I've often resorted to is making like a little bit of a cipher. So basically, what I did is I wrote the word Zooklus, and then I
Ah.
wrote the letters of the alphabet, and then I started just like, okay, well maybe I'll write the notes and using like 12 tone, 0 through 11 pitches.
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 0, and I just cycled through them. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes
Mm-hmm.
like this. Uh, in the Z column, it goes right to left, and then I sort of turn around, so
Ah,
the Y
okay.
column goes left, or or sorry, the Z column goes left to right, the Y column goes
Yeah, yeah, right
right
to
to left,
left.
and then it just keeps doing that. So it goes.
Okay. Okay.
Um, this intersection doesn't matter. I don't. I had written that down, and I guess Peter thought it was interesting, but this never became the piece. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, these. Then I took the column from Z, Y, K, L, U, S, and these pitch sets became the pitch sets from the piece.
I see.
So what I did was the basic harmonic structure is two things. It's the Zyklus spelt forwards, and then it's like sulcus, so this spelt backwards. So the
Mm-hmm.
chord structure is this: Z, Y, K, L, U, S, and then there's always a break in the middle, and then it goes S, U, L, K, Y, Z.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, so I think that what I did was I actually did. I would have to double check this, but the forward version I think goes bottom to top, so it would be like um, B flat, A. I can't actually remember what all of these things are, but I guess that's F sharp,
F sharp.
F, D, D flat,
Mm-hmm.
and then the reverse version, so like the Sulcus version, would start with a D flat, D. And the interesting thing that I didn't know, but that Peter found, was that just because of the way that this works, because there's 26 letters in the English alphabet and there's 12 pitches, it actually ends up that any of these letters that are close together um, form a 12 tone row.
Ah, okay.
So 1, 2,
Yeah,
5, 6,
yeah.
9, 10, 0, 3, 4, 7, 8, 11. And
Uh-huh.
that within the 12 tone row, and again, completely happenstance for me.
So you didn't really thought of that.
I wasn't thinking about that. Actually, the interesting thing for me was that a lot of these ended up having like intervallic things that were really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Um, the yeah, like this. If I went like 1, 2, 5, 6,
Yeah,
9, 10, those are all
yeah,
the same interval apart. So I had these
yes.
stacks of intervals like 0, 3, 4, 7, 8, 11. Those are all 3
Mm-hmm.
apart. So those were stacks of
Mm-hmm.
intervals. So for me, that was kind of interesting. I had one that was like based on major sevenths, one that was based on perfect fourths, another one that was based on I think sixths.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was the sound of these chords that I was finding really interesting was that. But no, I actually didn't think of the 12 tone row thing. But it
Mm-hmm.
was nice that Peter pointed out to me not only that this is makes a 12 tone row, but actually that the um, Z, K, and S material is prime, and the Y, L, and U material is the retrograde version of the prime.
I see. Okay.
But really, I
Like,
think that was just sort of a happy coincidence that worked out, and it's basically just because we're using, like an alphabet that has an even number of letters and a word that has an even number of letters and a pitch set that has 12 pitches, so it's an even number.
okay, but I'm really interested in what Peter found out and what you gave him. So you gave him the sucrose idea, right? With the not even
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, he figured out that it was a 12 tone row before I gave him this,
Okay.
actually. And then I showed him the notes that I made when I was writing this piece, and he was like,
Okay.
"Oh, okay, I see that." In fact, so this is the thing that I wrote. Um, so I wrote this whole tone
Yeah.
sheet, and he basically just digitized that. Yeah, and then I just wrote like, you can't see it on here, but so this is Z is right there,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, 10.
Yeah.
So 1, 2, 5,
Uh-huh.
6, 9, 10. And then I wrote the way, so that's going from top to bottom, and then I wrote the bottom to top way. So 10, 9, 6, 5, 2, 1.
Okay.
Yeah, or I think that should actually be a that should have two lines under it. Should just be that. Anyway, so I basically did this. I went through all of the letters and figured that out. Um, so these are I had like 6 note chords that I was working with for
Yeah.
everything,
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes they show up in the full 6 note chord structure. Sometimes they don't. But the important thing is that the um this little goofy thing here, Zyklus and then Sulcus, whatever, always happens
Yeah.
with 7 being silence, essentially, or a held note.
Okay.
So I'll just sort of take you to the score now and show you how that manifests.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically this bass line, that's the bass line of the forward, and then this is the backwards one. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily sound like it's not actually like the retrograde of this line because, as I showed you before, like the forward version is the bottom to top or top to
Yes.
bottom
Mm-hmm.
version, and the backwards version is the top to bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like Zyklus, Sulcus, or I'll just say 1, 2, and then within the bass flute solo it goes 1, 2, 1, 2, with silence in the middle. In the
Mm-hmm.
case of the solo, it's just a little like bass flute moment. And then we get to the piano solo, and it's 1, 2. Um, and in this case, I treated it a little bit differently. Instead of going back and forth, it's just
Mm-hmm.
1 repeated 4 times and then 2 repeated 4 times. And then here we have this is just 1, and this is sort of the fulcrum of the piece because previously I'd been going uh, every section has 1, 2, 1, 2. In this middle section that's all written out, it's actually just the whole thing is 1.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then when I get here to the drum solo, I'm like pointing at my screen as if you could see what I'm pointing at. But
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
get here to the drum solo, now it goes 2, 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is 2 and then 1. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how the piece is structured. So it's like chord progression A or chord progression 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and then 2, 1, 2, 1.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the harmonic rhythm also is a cycle. So it starts with half notes.
Mm-hmm.
So each of these chords is a half note, and that's true for the bass flute solo. It's all
Mm-hmm.
half note chords. And then in the piano improv, it's half note triplets.
Yes.
And then in this middle section, it's quarter notes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the most dense part of the piece. And basically, each of these is I just wrote 4-part counterpoint using those chords that I had. And the rhythms I just did freely and then sort of adjusted afterwards to make it so that it wasn't.
So all these other voices are also on that system.
Exactly.
Ah, I see.
But it's just basically like, okay, I have 6 notes that I can choose from. Let me make sure that each
Mm-hmm.
note is in each quarter note fragment. And some of
Mm-hmm.
them are going to happen more times than once.
Yeah.
I think in my original notes, I just wrote like 4 different versions of this 4-part counterpoint, and then I ended up using 2.
Mm-hmm.
2 of
Mm-hmm.
them didn't make the cut. So I just wanted to have something that felt really dense, really active, really like kind of exciting.
Yeah.
And so yeah, each of these has like this is all of the chords from the Z family. This is
Mm-hmm.
all the notes from the Y family,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. And it just sort of repeats every 6. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see it's the
Mm-hmm.
same bass notes every six
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah. It's really nice to know because when you listen to it, then you hear that it's very well structured and organized, but you can't really get it, what it is.
Uh-huh.
And so now you know
Hmm.
how it's.
Yeah, a lot of really dorky structure.
Yeah.
But
It's
yeah, so
great.
that's basically what this is. And then here in the drum solo, this obviously isn't all half note triplets, but I wanted it to not be half note triplets, but something approximately that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like a a variation on half note triplets for the harmonic rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the half note triplets do show up here,
Yeah.
but apart from that, it's just kind of like around about what a half
Yeah.
note triplet is, and then go back to half notes here at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's basically how that piece structures. It's is structured. It's kind of a lot of different cycles that are happening concurrently.
Yeah. Great. And this ending,
Hmm.
it sounds like so the ending is again one or two. What is it?
That's a good question. I can never really remember, and I think there's a couple mistakes actually. There was one thing
No,
that
it's
Peter pointed out to me. Oh no, maybe that's here. I think I think this is supposed to be an A
uh-huh.
right here, and
Okay.
it's a G. You know,
Yeah.
and usually when those things happen, like obviously when you're dealing with a lot of numbers and a lot of systems, like unless if you're using a computer to figure it out, sometimes you'll
Yeah.
accidentally write the wrong thing. And I sort of embrace those little moments where it's like, okay, yeah, I guess it should have been an A, but I don't like the sound of an A. I like the sound of a G right
Sure.
there. And so
Sure.
that's what it is. And always
Mm.
like being willing to use my ear to make the final decision rather than like whatever system I've decided is in place.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, the last thing I'm pretty sure is the one cycle, but it actually might I might be wrong on that. Yeah.
I really
The
like
last little
the
section is it's a bit of an outlier. Um, I just wanted like kind of a weird like, oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I actually really like it because it's somehow the piece stops and it's like it could have gone on for some more bars, but then it's also nice, if that there's a surprising moment to stop and also the kind of rhythm that you use is it's not very clear, so it's a very hanging in the air thing, and
mhm,
it fits to the thing that you try to write a piece, which you could also start in the middle and go to the end and then start somewhere else. So this could be also a start, maybe.
totally. And I was kind of thinking about that, but I also just sort of like this idea of like, I guess when Matt Mitchell and I first started hanging out, I remember him. We were playing some piece of his, and he was made some like snarky comment about how like it doesn't repeat like real music, just like but kind of taking a jab at how in jazz we just like repeat everything all the time.
Aha.
Like when you listen to contemporary classical music or other music, like nothing, not everything repeats all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I've had that little idea kind of like rolling around in my head for a long time, and I like
Aha.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
throwing things into my music where it's like, yeah, maybe it just happens once. Maybe that's all
Yeah,
you get.
yeah. So
And
it
it's
gets
like a little
the
bit abstract, but like that's what I felt the piece needed, and it didn't need to happen again or anything.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And did you play this also live?
Yeah, yeah, we played it a lot live. The end section. This is actually really hard
Yeah,
because
yeah.
everybody lines
I
up, and everybody wants to line up with everybody else.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not
Um,
together most of the time.
yeah,
And then also there are
so
some
that
parts where I just thought, is it? I mean, how much time did it take you to practice this? But and also, did everything was finished before you met, or did you change something during the rehearsals and during the process of getting to know the music and?
yeah, I did because everybody in that band was really busy
Mm,
then and no longer.
yeah,
But
they will be.
when we recorded in January 2018, um, basically I got everybody for like 4 days, and I had booked it months in advance, and 4 days is what I had. So for the recording, we just did 2 days of rehearsal and a couple of gigs, and then 2 days of recording.
Wow. Okay.
Um, but for before that, because that felt like I really like hearing music that I'm going to record a little bit in advance, so I know if it's going
Mm-hmm.
to be cool or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about a month before that, I had a reading session with what I had
Okay.
at that point, and I think a lot of people from the band could come, but not everybody. So I had a couple of subs, but just played through all the like pretty close to finished drafts that I had.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this is something that happens. I mean, I know it's different in different scenes. Like the New York scene tends to be very, very like just people are busy,
Yeah.
you know, in like a way where it's their time is really like if you can get somebody for a rehearsal, like you want to like you might not get them for another rehearsal.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't want to come into a band with like a to a rehearsal with something where you're trying to work something out with the band.
Yeah.
And I miss that about some other scenes where it's possible to like come up with something that's a little bit more sketch like and kind of, you know, work on something with a group. But in New York, just sort of the economics of the situation and just like
Mm.
the fact that everybody's got a million different things going on means that generally speaking, you don't get the luxury of doing that.
Mm.
So yeah, I booked a reading session just to kind of hear through things so I could know which decisions needed to be made in advance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
Mm-hmm.
okay, actually that thing was a little bit too long or it didn't really work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I had heard everything. I guess in like December 2017, and then did a bunch of edits, and then like brought it into the band for rehearsals a couple days before we ended up recording it. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think the rehearsal process is. I honestly don't remember a lot. We had a lot on our plates with some of the other
Mm.
music in this band. Um, so this, I also, like was writing specifically for the people in this group.
Mm.
So, when I say like vibes, cello, and trombone coming in here, it's specifically Chess Smith and Chris Hoffman and Jacob Garchick. And I
Mm.
know they're playing, and I, you
Yeah.
know, like know their sensitivity and like how musical they are. And I didn't need to do a lot of explanation for what this
Yeah.
would sound like. I
Mm.
knew that they would kind of like do the right thing. So I don't think for that thing we had to talk too much about anything. I think we just kind
Mm-hmm.
of did it. A lot of the rehearsal time is just like, oh wait, right, like chess actually needs to switch to drums
Okay.
right here.
Yeah.
So then I need to wait and make sure that I'm looking at chess before I cue this section
Yeah.
so
Mm.
that he can hit right at the beginning. Or right here, I need to switch to C flute from bass flute. So when we
Okay.
play this live, this is much longer than on the record
Yeah.
because I'm dropping a giant instrument and picking up a much smaller instrument.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think like stuff like this that's really dense takes a second to rehearse and get everybody feeling comfortable. Actually, this section right here is really challenging because the bass player, well, Chris
He
Torti,
doesn't play quarter. Yeah, he doesn't play half notes. He plays
he's
the
playing
trip.
quarter note or half note triplets. So
Yeah,
if you're
that
listening
makes
for
it
bass,
really.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. If you're listening for bass for the quarter note, you're kind of
you get
you're
lost.
out of luck. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this section actually we ended up rehearsing more than almost anything else in the
Okay,
piece.
I'm glad to hear that actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Have to listen for this like this quarter note figure played by the bottom part of the vibes that doesn't even hit on beat one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And when you write this section number three, is that do you write that on the piano or is it that you take your computer for listening to the different things of the notes when they come together?
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, not the first. I didn't write this on piano. I'm gonna share the. Okay, this is my original.
Wow. Mm.
Um, so I usually just write pen and pencil and paper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in this case, I knew what the harmonic content was. I knew that the harmonies individually sounded good. So as you can see, like if I zoom in on this a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a photo I took, but this has the word Zuklus written above it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I knew this was like the Z chord material, Y, K. That helped me keep track. And then I just kind of, um, I wrote the bass line. That's obvious. It's just
Yeah.
quarter notes. And then I probably wrote each line at a time, and then
Hmm.
kind of wanted to write something that was contrapuntal, where people weren't necessarily like playing, where the lines were
Yeah.
crossing a little bit and going in and out, but also where like people weren't necessarily being super active all the time in the same measure. Like if one person was really active, another person was resting. Just kind of like,
Mm.
basic like how to write music um,
Yeah.
thoughts. And um, yeah, so I wrote it out just freehand, basically, like going through all these different variations. I think this is all of the different variations I wrote. So there's one, two, three, four. And then, as I said, I just ended up using two of them. And then to check it, I put it into my computer
Yeah,
and
sure.
I used whichever ones sounded best to me, and probably
Mm.
did some tweaking after that point too. Um, yeah, I tend to do a lot of stuff, especially when it's something where I have like kind of a pretty clear idea of what sort of music I want to write in mind. I
Hmm.
tend to do a lot of um, away from my instrument writing, um, especially when there's like, okay, I already know what the harmony is. I don't
Hmm.
actually want to be bogged down by like my inability to play piano.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
um, and so just like I know this will sound fine. I want to use my ears to imagine what's going on. I do a lot of stuff where it's really just like pencil and paper.
Hmm.
Um, I do write at the piano sometimes. I write at my instrument sometimes. I
Yeah.
occasionally will write at the computer. I tend to try to use that as the last step, um, and hold off going to the computer as long as possible, just because I feel like you have to make a lot of decisions um,
Hmm.
at the
Hmm.
computer that you don't have to make when you're just freehand writing
Yeah.
something.
Okay. Let me ask you one thing before we go to idiom number one. Or when did you decide to make the music you're doing? What was the thing which triggered you to go that direction? Or I mean, there is not one direction, but go into this kind of music you're doing.
Yeah, I can kind of trace a lot of it. Um, so I did my undergrad degree in Montreal at
Hmm.
McGill University, and I was a jazz flute major.
Hmm.
And as a jazz flute major, recognized that if I wanted to play gigs, that I needed to book them myself. And so I started kind of. I mean, I'd played. I, I had bands before, but I started the first band that was just my music, um, and it was a quintet. And yeah, just started like writing music for that group, and was finding myself even at that point writing these pieces that were like pretty weird, long form,
Uh-huh.
quirky little things. And I would often chat about that because people couldn't sight read them and we have to rehearse them for a lot longer than other people's music. And so I didn't write those pieces as much as probably some of my like little more lead sheety type pieces, but a lot of it was like I can kind of see that that was already there even
Uh-huh.
when I was doing my undergrad. I was just drawn to longer form things, and a lot of that was like the music that I was listening to. I like John Hollenbeck's music, for example,
Yeah.
or Ben
Hmm.
Monder's music.
Hmm.
I was listening to this like Chris Speed's music was super
Hmm.
influential on me. Um, like kind of like what was hip in Brooklyn at the time was
Hmm.
the stuff that I was listening to. This is like 2002 to 2006.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I was just like drawn to these really long compositions, but didn't really know what to do with it. And also was in Montreal, the music scene there is, or at the time was pretty open. A lot of straight ahead jazz too, but like a lot of pretty creative, free-ish improvisation
Hmm.
going on too. So I was surrounded by a lot of like pretty non-traditional stuff. A lot of my friends were into playing pretty non-traditional stuff. I had a lot of, like weird little bands, with weird instrumentations and a lot of like experimental things. Uh, Nothing like groundbreaking, but like I definitely wasn't just while the degree that I did was a pretty like standard based jazz degree. the
Mm-hmm.
music that I started getting into as I was like a little bit older was much different than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to New York, and did a master's degree at Manhattan School of Music, and that was pretty traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like was happy doing that. And then I moved to Berlin, giving you my whole life story here. But I
Yeah,
moved to
it's
Berlin.
interesting.
I moved to Berlin basically because I finished this master's degree in New York and was looking for work afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
turns out that it was a lot more expensive to live in New York as a freelancer than it had been to live in Montreal as a freelancer. And
Uh-huh.
so
Okay.
I was finding that like getting a couple of Craigslist students didn't really pay my rent. Um, and I had all these German friends that I'd gone to school with at Manhattan School.
Ah.
Uh, and so a year after I graduated from Manhattan School, um, I decided to go to Berlin. I applied for this for the program at the JIB and ended up getting in. And even though I already had a master's degree, I just was like, I knew that I needed to change something.
Mm-hmm.
I was just unhappy with what was going on in my life at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved to Berlin, and that's kind of where I feel like the trajectory of my music really firmed up. So I was
Mm-hmm.
studying composition with John Hollenbeck,
Mm-hmm.
and was I as I said, like Montreal had been pretty experimental for me, and then I went to Manhattan School and felt like I was really like doing straight ahead jazz. And when I was in Berlin, was like, oh right, I love experimental music. That's that's I want to know how to make these sounds. I want to know how to like write this kind of music, and just started really getting invested both in composition and also like more extended technique zones of my instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and like free improv world stuff. And yeah, so I feel like studying with John and being surrounded by the music scene in Berlin really helped shape who I am as a composer. Um, so figuring out like, oh, those long form compositions that I was writing like all through my 20s, actually like it's cool to write those. Like it's fine that that's what I'm hearing. I can work on them even harder than I thought I was allowed to work on them because
Mm-hmm.
like I sort of had this mentality that like as a jazz composer you spend like maybe 40 minutes writing a little tune and then you bring it into the band, but
Mm-hmm.
not that like I write a piece of music and I spend a month on it.
Yeah.
um, so having license to like spend more time in composition and also explore different sound worlds. And then yeah, the rest of it is just kind of like after I finished off at the JIB, I moved back, and I kind of had a better idea of where I wanted to be situated. So I moved to Brooklyn, met a lot of my current like colleagues and peers, and feel like pretty influenced by a lot of my friends' work too, in terms of just the direction that my music has gone.
So, but one can say that you actually had this from the beginning on, that this kind of a longer form, as you said, longer form writing was there from the beginning on, and you just found it formed later on than maybe when you got from Manhattan School to Berlin. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I think in retrospect, I can see it as that. At the time, I don't know that I would have seen it as that, but like for sure, I
mhm,
when I sort of look back over the
mhm,
steps that I took, like there was something of it there for a long time.
mhm, mhm.